What's up, guys? Happy Tuesday. Welcome back to another episode of Eat, Train, Prosper. Today, Bryan is joining us from vacation in Wisconsin, and we are going to get into how to deal with some injuries. Bryan has recently, I should say, injured his foot, which he is going to go into a little bit more, and we thought it would be a very timely time to talk about this as we've both experienced considerable injuries over our lifting careers, we can put it that way, and it would be pretty good to talk about because they are somewhat inevitable over long enough time horizon. Before we get into this, we'll cover some updates. Bryan, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, so you guys will see if you're watching YouTube right now that I'm sitting down. And to be completely honest with you, the reason I'm sitting is not even because of my foot. It's because my low back is probably even worse than my foot right now. And I think that it's caused by the foot. So this is going to be one of my main points in our conversation today is kind of watching out for compensation injuries that occur from like the primary injury. And so since this injury occurred for me, which I'll go over here and discuss with you guys if you haven't been following my story, but since this occurred on Tuesday last week, basically a few hours after we recorded our prior episode, I've been hobbling around on one foot, basically a mix of crutches and wearing a boot, and then trying to elevate my good foot so that it matches the height of the foot with the boot. But ultimately hobbling around for a week straight and still putting in between like 5,000 and 8,000 steps, trying to like get after kids and, be a parent and all that good stuff. My low back is just completely jacked up, and it feels awful. I don't really know what to say beyond that. It kind of reminds me of the injuries that I used to have during the CrossFit days when we would do like too many deadlifts and get like a little QL or an SI or like some sort of low back tweak. But I like can't lift my knee up to put my shorts on, or much less my shoes on, because it pulls on that low back piece. And then you should see me. It's actually kind of comical trying to put pants or shorts on, because I can't bend over to do it. And yet I also can't stand on my bad foot to do it. So imagine trying to shift your weight from side to side, but being unable to actually put your weight on one of the sides. And so the process of me getting dressed in the morning these days is one that you'd probably get a little bit of enjoyment and a couple cackles out of if you actually were to watch me try. So your boy's in a bit of shambles right now, but let's talk about some positive stuff. And do you have any quick thoughts on any of that before I jump into updates here?
I do. So the thing I hate when I always say the thing that's interesting, right? That's like, it's like, it just comes out of my mouth. I don't even want to say it. So I've been like consciously trying to not say that's interesting, because I really have different thoughts about it. As you were talking about the low back thing, I'm sure the listeners remember back in like April, I injured my low back. But as you were talking, I was trying to remember which side it was, because of like the compensation that happened over the preceding next, weeks. The other side of my low back was giving me such problems that I literally sitting here cannot remember which side I had originally injured, because I know that like both sides have bothered me, in the 2 months after from the compensatory, thing of it. So it really is interesting. And I mean, I experienced that, which we're going to get into, a little bit. I'm sure I've been in a boot or was in a boot at a period as well. And yeah, I mean, the compensatory issues and just the shifts that your body makes to deal with it just opens up like a can of worms, really.
Yeah. So my right foot is like the primary place of abuse for my body over the years, the last like 5-6 years. So you opened by saying we've had our fair share of injuries over the course of our lifting careers and stuff. And I would actually say that like for somebody that's trained 25 years, I feel like the amount of injuries I've had have been quite minor and not extremely consistent. So my right foot, like I was saying, has taken the brunt of it over the last few years. So just over since 2016 In 2016, I was doing rope climbs at San Diego Athletics and came down from a rope too fast. It was coiled on the ground, and my right foot kind of hit the side of the rope and twisted over. I'm pretty sure I tore some stuff on the top of my foot because it took like 4 to 6 weeks for me to be able to walk normal again. But of course, being a dude, I never got it diagnosed or anything. And then 2 years after that, I smashed my toe. I dropped a 25-pound plate on my toe and completely shattered like every digit in my big toe. And then on the same foot, this is what just happened to me at the photo shoot. So third injury in 5 or 6 years on the right foot. Basically, the story is I was all ready to go for the photo shoot last Tuesday. And I did a couple warm-up runs just to kind of get like some glucose moving through my body and that sort of stuff. I always notice that movement, like brisk walking or slow jogging, really tends to facilitate that glucose disposal into the, maybe that's the wrong word, glucose disposal. What am I trying to say here?
Uptake,
that one. So anyways, I went out for a short little run, noticed that my heel felt a little tight, but didn't really think much of it. Just kind of walked the last 400 meters and we started the photo shoot. Did a couple good photos. And then the photographer was like, hey, let's get a couple running shots. And I had completely forgotten that my heel felt tight while I was warming up. And so we did a running shot. He got a couple decent shots. And then he's like, all right, let's do one more. And literally the third step of that second run, and my heel went pop, pop. And I've never felt anything like that before. I've never actually had that. I don't want to say it's audible pops because I don't think anyone on the outside would have heard it, but it was certainly internal to the point that I felt a legitimate pop, pop in my heel. And that was maybe a quarter of the way through the photo shoot. So I had to essentially just man up and find a way to continue doing the rest of the photo shoot on a hobbled foot. And one thing I'm curious about is actually I couldn't really flex my quad fully because I couldn't push through the ground on that foot. And the majority of the quad shots that we did came after the injury. So I have a bit of trepidation in how those photos are going to look from the outside, especially on my right quad. So that'll be interesting. And then obviously I couldn't really flex anything on the backside either. So doing any sort of like back double buys or anything like that, I couldn't get any, not like I have any fucking hamstrings to show anyways, because they're all covered in fat. But if I did have any hamstrings to show, you wouldn't have seen them anyways. So overall, I think the photo shoot went well, all things considered. I think we got a couple decent photos, a couple that I am kind of not so hot on. I actually haven't seen the photos from the final product, but just kind of looking through the lens at the shots that he would do in the moment. And then one of the things that he and I both pointed out that actually is making kind of a significant difference in the photos is the time of year that we did the photo shoot, because the last 2 years we've done it in September. So now we're talking 3 months after the summer solstice. So the sun is in a different spot in the sky. This year we did the photo shoot basically at the summer solstice. It was the end of June and the sun was much higher in the sky than I anticipated. So it created a bit less shadowing than we've had in prior years. So I don't really know. I know a couple of the photos I saw, I was kind of disappointed, and I showed him the photo from last year on my Instagram, and I was like, hey, this is what we did last year. And then I was looking at the one from this year, and I was just kind of like underwhelmed with it. And so it was easy for me to get down on myself and be like, oh, I had a bad year of like results. Like I didn't gain any muscle, like all these thoughts going through my head. And then there's the lighting factor and the fact that I tore my foot, and like, man, there's just so many variables here. It's really hard to get any accurate representation of all of that. But one of the cool things of the photo shoot is we didn't do photos like this last year, but as I was hobbling away from the photo shoot and we were about to wrap up, we walked through this tunnel that went underneath a double yellow line road. And there was just really cool light coming out the back of the tunnel. So as I was walking out the front of the tunnel, he snapped like 1,000 photos of me and like doing a push-up in the tunnel, a clapping push-up, like kind of just walking around looking at my phone. And some of the really cool lighting and shadowing from the tunnel are actually going to create some pretty savage photos. So I am excited to see those when they come out. And then, like I said, a bit of trepidation on some of the other photos, but time will tell. We'll see how they look when that occurs. And then I have a laundry list of other updates here, but do you want to comment on that, or do you want to give a couple of your updates here?
Yeah, I will. The big thing with the lighting is it is important in the time of the year and that sort of thing, especially with your noon situations where or about midday where the lighting is like straight top down. That's like a very non-optimal lighting situation. And then just for any of the listeners who maybe are not that well versed in it, like it's sunlight hour, or no, is it not sunlight hour? What do they call it? It's like the golden hour is like the hour before the sun goes down. That's some of the really cool, best natural lighting for like taking pictures. And I mean, it really does make a difference. So it was a very, interesting thing to pick up on. And I'm sure when some of the photos do come out and stuff, you can share that. And then the last thought I had on that is you said, is it the right quad you couldn't flex fully this year?
Yeah.
So then you can just throw up some comparisons of like this year's left quad to last year's right quad.
Yeah, it's interesting. I wonder, I feel like maybe this is an excuse, but I was kind of distracted by the foot. So I was finding it just difficult to flex in general. Like when I would flex my upper body, I would notice that I would lose connection with my lower body because I was like, part of my mind was the right side of my brain is focused on this injury on the right side. And then I'm focusing on what my upper body's doing. And then the left quad just kind of maybe got like left behind type thing. So I really have no idea how they're going to turn out. It's just kind of up in the air at this point. And so maybe I'll have some decent comparisons. Maybe I won't. Hopefully at least I can get some like decent upper body comparison shots with lighting considerations and all that.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. It's as something that I've now been giving more effort than I have in the past is just like trying to be more consistent with my posing for like my check-in photos. And it's difficult. Even just doing the same thing like week to week, I'm not like practicing it enough, but it's like frustrating to try and just like recreate the same poses and then like, oh wow, well I was able to do it with my upper body, but now, my lower body, I mean, there's a lot more that goes into it. And if you like in the back of your mind realize like, I just have this foot injury, right, happen, I don't know how severe or minor it may be, that will 100% impact, just your ability to stay focused, right, with the shoot and stuff like that. So, I mean, like, yeah, I get it. I really, really do.
So what's going on with you? What do we have updates for Straker today?
So I'll start with a funny one. Whenever you travel and go to some of these newer places, there's always these, I've talked about this before, these times where you just get your ass kicked on things. And you're just like the dumb foreigner who's like unaware, And one of the interesting things here is like Bali's generally a very inexpensive place, but it can be very expensive as well. And one of the things, like the grocery store is kind of different. Like you take your vegetables and fruits, and then you go over to this like weighing station, and they like weigh them and print out a label thing and like sticker it, and then you go like pay for it when you go to the checkout. So they like it's just been spinach has just disappeared. I don't know if it's like not spinach season or whatever, but there's like just straight up no more spinach. So I was like, okay, and with my like egg scramble, I started just doing like bell peppers, right? Another vegetable I like, chop up, put in there. So I'm buying bell peppers at the grocery store. And the guy who's like weighing it, he's like trying to tell me something, but his like English isn't the greatest. And then something with me, I'm only going to ask someone to repeat themselves twice. If I can't get it after that time, I'm just going to say like, yeah, whatever. And just like agree with them and just like move on.
Nod and smile.
Yeah, nod and smile, right? So basically did this with the peppers. I got like, I think like 6 peppers, maybe 7, like 3 green, 3 red or something like that. And then I go to pay, and the lady's like, hey, like, these peppers are like 90% of your grocery bill. Like, do you actually want them? And at this point, I'm like, well, I mean, they're already bagged and like labeled. Like, it's too late to back out now. So I'm just like, yeah, whatever. So then I pay for it, and I ended up spending like $30 on fucking 6 peppers. And the guy who was weighing it was trying to be like, asshole, these are really fucking expensive peppers. Do you want them? And the thing that's funny is the peppers were like more than half of the price that I pay to get my food prepped for me for the entire week.
Wow.
So like I obviously cook my own breakfast, but it's one of those things where it's like when you're in the know, right? So then I just messaged the food prep people. I was like, hey, can you just like chop up bell peppers and not cook them and throw them in with my meal prep? And they're like, yeah, sure. What color do you want? Right. So I just like swapped that out, that vegetable. But me going to do that myself in the grocery store, I'm paying like 4 times the price than I would to have someone else do it for me because they just like have different sources. And, you know, obviously they're not stupid like I am and pay for it. So that was my kind of funny, you know, international story where I got my ass kicked paying a lot of money for bell peppers.
Are they not like inherent to Bali? Are they're having to be shipped in from elsewhere?
I literally do not have a clue. But
Okay.
the week before, they were not super, super expensive. And this week they were. I have no idea. I don't know if they were like a special type of bell pepper but yeah. So now I just know, okay, I get my bell peppers from the food prep place because they have, you know, much better sources. But it's like one of those things like, yeah, I paid like $30 for bell peppers on
That's pretty
on
nuts.
the weekend. Yeah. And then I'm in my final week of the metabolic training, which I am happy about because it's not that I don't like it, but it feels, except for one day. One day is like hell on earth. And the reason for that is it's leg press, leg extension, seated leg curl of like, you know, metabolic style, incomplete rest method on the leg press is hell on earth. It's absolutely terrible. And it's one of those things where like, it's not a shortened overload movement like a leg extension where you're going to like fail at the top of the rep. Like unless you like, you know, outrageously misload the leg press, like you're going to be able to perform the reps. It's really just like how much pain can you like push into to continue, you know, doing those reps. So aside from that day, it just feels like kind of like easy because you're in this weird place where I'm like, well, if I increase the weight, I'm going to start failing the reps. And that, you know, is besides the whole purpose. You want to be able to complete all the reps across the 5 sets. But with a short rest period, you have to reduce load, you know. But then I don't feel like it's like a very taxing training day. I'm in and out of the gym in like 40 minutes, which is very, very low for me. And then I just don't feel like I'm putting in like the effort that I normally do. So I'm excited for this to kind of be done and get back into like actual hypertrophy training, which is ultimately what we're here for. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So it's just interesting. And it's been like, I remember this back to when you would program different things for us at the CrossFit gym. Like I am not very, you know, good from an endurance standpoint. So like I will drop off like heavily and hard from trying like repeated bouts at a same, you know, weight sort of thing. And this is just like a stark, you know, reminder of how not great I am at it. So that's another reason too. Like I suck at this and I'm failing quick and I need to drop the weight too.
I'm curious if you feel like you'll notice any kind of auxiliary benefits or anything kind of after it when you go back to hypertrophy.
Yeah, I am interested to see that. So I will, by the time next week's episode will drop, I will be back into hypertrophy. And then the last small update I have, and this one's a cool one specifically because we were talking around like my lower back injury and stuff. When I got back to Bali, when I was here a couple years ago, I like messed up like one of my glutes, like an acute injury thing. And I found this guy, like a body worker, and he was really, really good. But I mean, fuck, I think it's like a cultural thing where like, you know, like let's say in the States, like you go to like a massage place, like if you are very obviously in high amounts of pain, like they're going to reduce the pressure and ask like, is that too hard sort of thing? Like this guy is all about his business. He's like, you came to me to fix this injury. Like we're going to fix this injury. Just lay there and take it. And
I need one of those guys, man.
You know, like, have you ever been in so much pain where your body's just pissing sweat? Like, you're just sweating profusely. It's literally like a stress response. But damn, are these like massages not effective? And at yoga the other day, I've been going to this like a hatha slow flow yoga class like on Sundays. It's like I really, really like it. We were doing like a twisting. I'm not going to pretend like I know the names of any of the fucking poses. But for the first time, I was like able to really reach extension and actually like look at my hand up at the ceiling. And I was like, holy shit, I have all this extra mobility in my like scaps and like thoracic area from these like god awful massages, because that's where a lot of it's been. And it was like in that moment, I was like, holy shit, all this new like movement I have back, which was really, really cool. And I'm really excited about it.
That's awesome, man. Very cool to be able to see like the tangible representation of all that pain you've gone through.
Yeah. It has been a lot too.
Yeah.
But that's it.
Cool.
That's it for my
need one of
updates.
those. Cool. Well, let me just continue jumping down my list here. So just to put a wrap on the photo shoot real quick, I ended up doing the photo shoot that morning. I woke up at 185.0, which is within the same 1 pound range that I've done it the last 2 years. So I was between 185 and 186 each year. So I'm right there. Didn't get quite as low as I mentioned in the last episode. I got down to 183.2 at the lowest. So right around the same as prior year. And the main difference here will just be the lighting and then the time of year that we did it when the pictures come out. Regarding the foot, so the internet was convinced that I had torn my posterior tib tendon, which is actually kind of like a really fucking big deal. If I would have torn that, it would have had, basically required surgery and potential issues with ankle stability throughout the rest of my life and stuff like that. But I went to Synapse physical therapy here in the Boulder area and met with Nicole, who's best friends with Laura. She's the kind of COO of our Paragon training company. And they diagnosed it really quickly and easily as partially ruptured plantar fascia. So that is a much better diagnosis than a posterior tib tendon. And basically what they said is that if I would have torn it fully, I'd probably have zero pain. They're like, it would have swollen up and you would have had a bruise, and 2 or 3 days later, you would have basically been back to normal type thing. But because it's a partial rupture, apparently your body gets a little confused as to what exactly it's supposed to do. Like, do I repair this thing? Is it like, it creates all these confusion in your body, and the pain is quite severe. So I'm now on day 7, and I would say that the pain is still there. Like, I still can't walk fully on my foot. I'm still in the boot, all that good stuff. So there was a study. There was actually a meta-analysis, I believe, done on people with this exact injury. And all the people that were in the study, the healing took between 3 and 26 weeks, which is a large range, with the mean being 9 weeks. So I'm guessing I'm going to be on the shorter side of that, but I definitely think, 4 to 6 weeks before I'm like fully back to normal. On the positive side, I am able to train. For those following my story, I did go and do legs yesterday. Leg curls, leg extensions, no big deal at all. Part of me wonders whether my low back situation was aggravated by doing RDLs. And this is something that we'll get into later as we go through the injury discussion. So I'm not going to touch on that too much here. Just a thought in the back of my mind. And then upper body stuff is obviously no big deal at this point. One thing I do want to discuss is my nutrition over the last 7 days, because I think it's somewhat interesting for the viewer here.
Let's do it.
Yeah. So Tuesday was the day of the photo shoot last week. And after the photo shoot, I had a big plan of what I was going to eat. So I ordered 2 cheesesteaks, a side of fries. Then I bought a massive apple pie that had 8 servings in it, and ended up eating 5 servings of the 8 servings. Ate half a tub of vanilla ice cream, ate some cinnamon pita chips, ate a couple pieces of brownies, and woke up the next morning so jacked. I was so jacked. I was so vascular. And It's wild because you kind of called this. You were like, it's going to be the day after you have like a really big cheat that you're going to wake up looking the best. But man, how do you do that purposefully? Like, how do you say like, hey, I have a photo shoot tomorrow. Let me go eat 5,000 calories of fat and carbs and just pray that I'm going to wake up looking great the next day type thing, Because what I did is I ate 450 or 500 carbs and I kept my fat a little lower on Monday because I know that this is the most prudent route to ensuring success the next day in the photo shoot. But in retrospect, man, I way underdid it. Like 450 to 500 carbs was just not enough because it was after that 5,000 calorie cheat or binge or whatever you want to call it. On Stronger by Science, they said they prefer to call these planned hedonic deviations instead of binges or cheat meals. And so the difference being that one is planned and one is just I can't control myself type thing. So mine was a bit of both. Like I sort of planned it. I was like, I'm buying this apple pie a week in advance. I'm buying this ice cream a week in advance, like all this stuff. So while it was a binge, it was also sort of a planned hedonic deviation. But yeah, I mean, like, man, I don't even know if next year, like I would do that. Like knowing what happened this year, I don't know that I next year would just be like, you know what, Monday night, I'm going to do the 5,000 calorie binge and I'm going to look great on Tuesday. Like, I just don't know if that's like a reasonable thing to assume. But I also don't know like how much more do I need to go? It's kind of this ambiguous territory where like I thought that I was doing it right, but then you realize the next day that you way underdid it. So how do you kind of find that delicate balance? Like, is the best way to do a planned refeed maybe 3 or 4 weeks prior and kind of assess how your body looks a few days later type thing? But then at the same time, like if I were to go and do a replicated version of this binge that I did, I'm now 2 weeks behind in my diet because I had 5,000 calories one day. So it's very ambiguous and it's hard to tell exactly what the right approach is here. What do you think?
It's very, very hard. The only people that I know are really, really good at it are people that prep a lot of people for bodybuilding shows because this is pretty much the like sole time you get to practice this sort of thing. I do know being ready early is generally the goal so that you can practice this. Mm-hmm. Most people will do it around like 7 to 10 days out, a large acute overfeeding thing. One, to help alleviate some of like, cortisol buildup and stuff like that heading into like peak week, but also as a test to see one, how digestion's going to hold up with an acute, carbohydrate overfeeding, what foods to test on the acute carbohydrate overfeeding, and then see how the body responds. To my knowledge, it's something that there really isn't that good of like research on, especially because a lot of people will respond very, very differently. I've known of like some, not firsthand, accounts I cannot say that I was there for, where of people having these huge 1,000+ carb overfeeds and waking up leaner and lighter the next morning. So like imagine that you're like 185, you have 1,000 carbs the day before and you wake up at like 184.7 or something like that. Like from a
nuts.
like a not thermogenesis standpoint. What's that word? What's like the word thermodynamic standpoint? Like it doesn't make sense. So it is like really, really interesting. And the approach that I take, like I have a client who we are in this right now. He has a photo shoot in 6 days. We are going to take like 4 days out, a very large overfeeding thing. I'm going to like, training is going to come down and we're just going to kind of like that overfeeding is going to be like hey, I want to try and even maybe spill a little bit to see how you look in the evening, in the morning, and then we're going to kind of not like a linear load, but then kind of just try and stay full over a couple days heading into it. Because I don't know if I've talked about this too much on the podcast before. Like I take a very conservative approach with my coaching. And I just, if I can do something over like 4 or 5 days as opposed to like 1 day, I just know like the tighter time frame you have, the more precise that calculation needs to be. And that's really, really hard to do well. Whereas if we have 4 days to load, we can, test over multiple evenings and mornings and just try and like hold that look over multiple days, as opposed to like, trying to hit it with a shotgun the night before sort of thing, which is generally like any time that I've done that before, I've been like happy with those shoots. But then, like I said, 2 or 3 days later, I'm like, what the fuck? It's so much better now, sort of thing. So,
Yeah. The confusing part for me is that like every piece of anecdote and research on this loading procedure is like a carb dominant loading with a low fat. But that day that I did the apple pie and the cheesesteaks and all that stuff, I had over 200 grams of fat, and then also had, 5, 6, 7, 800 carbs, whatever it is. I didn't even calculate it. I just kind of ate. And so based on what I know, it would be like, dude, that fat like really screwed up like the assimilation of your carbohydrates and the uptake of the glucose and like all this stuff. And yet that's not the way it appeared for me. So it's interesting.
yeah, I do know like generally you don't want fats to be like over 200, but you can get to a point where your body is like so carbohydrate like dominant basically in its fuel preference, where you need to add in fats a little bit just to slow the burning of all that carbohydrate. So I do know people who are like very very lean and traditionally have been like very low fat for multiple weeks heading into the show, the diet or whatever. There will be a little bit of targeted fats included just to slow down your body of pissing through all that carbohydrate.
Interesting. Yeah, so just to put a wrap on this food thing, I've been eating basically like a donkey for the last 7 days. The first 3 days were slightly less than that first day, but still completely free, ate whatever I wanted to the entire time. I actually had 7 Snicker bars one night and stuff like that. So just completely throwing caution to the wind. And by day 4, I went to bed at 200 pounds and woke up at 194. So looking at that, somebody could be like, man, you've gained like 10 pounds in 4 days. And really in reality, that was probably like 7 or 8 pounds of like water and food volume and all that stuff. And then a couple pounds of fat. So last night, Monday, was the first day that I sort of dialed things back a little, and I ate super healthy all day and then just had 2 Snickers bars at night, and woke up this morning at 190. So I'm guessing that once I take myself back to maintenance-ish, I should drop back down into the high 180s, and that'll probably be where I settle after a week of eating as I did. I had a question from somebody on Instagram that asked me, like, how do you feel about you worked so hard to get this physique and then now you just gained 10 pounds, which in reality, I didn't gain 10 pounds, but you basically just lost everything you gained type thing. And my response back was that I was getting lean for a purpose, and I achieved my purpose sort of. But 2, I just really like psychologically don't do well with reverse diets. It creates this extreme food focus for me that is almost just as gnarly as the diet itself. Like I still find myself, thinking about what foods I'm going to eat, how much food I'm going to eat, playing a little bit of macro Tetris, like things like that. So for me, like I take my 3 months a year or 4 months or whatever it is, and I diet and I get to the goal. And then that creates this like space and freedom maybe for me to not have to reverse out. And then I have enough of a general sense of what I should be putting in my body and, where I operate optimally, that for me to get to an absurd amount of body weight, even over the next 6 months, like if I were to hit the high 190s, 200 over the next 6 months, I just wouldn't expect it. Like I just don't think my body's going to do that. And it has this natural regulation pattern where if I overeat for a day or two, then I naturally will undereat for a day or two following that. And it won't even have to take any discipline. It'll just be following natural hunger signals. So to answer this person's question, I'm not worried about it. And I'd much rather give in to these like planned hedonic deviations than to sit there worrying about counting calories after 3 months of dedicated counting calories type thing. So that's my thoughts on that. And now that it's been 7 days of basically doing whatever I want, I am now, as of starting today, going to get back to a maintenance plus maintaining, main gaining type thing, and just kind of let things fall where they do at that point. Any thoughts on that? I have one or two more updates here.
I do have thoughts on this. And being that we are a training and nutrition podcast, I feel like this is one of those conversations I really should input some details
Yep.
on. So with this, I think how people approach this is really going to come back to what your goals are, right? You know or knew that, hey, I am going into photo shoot, target is 185, and then I want to settle back in around the high 180s thing. And you're like completely on board with that. And you have decided that it is not worth the reverse diet to stay maybe in the like 185, 186. You're like, hey, I'm going to overshoot for a few days, some inflammation. I'm going to like scratch that itch of, lower quality food. And I know I'll settle back into like the, maybe 188, 189, something like that. That's perfectly fine, right? I definitely don't see any problem with that, because you know that is the goal. For people that like have like dieted to, like, for whatever reason, their goal is maybe 180 pounds or something like that. If they are not, it all depends on how you look at the last like maybe 6 or 8 weeks it took you to get those final like pounds off. If you're going to be like pretty upset that like, hey, I just busted my ass for these last 8 weeks to go from like 190 to 185, and in 4 days I'm going to be back at 190, like if that bothers you, then taking the reverse approach is going to be, a much more appropriate angle for you. But that's going to be very individualized, because like you're not tied to a number, Brian. You're like, yeah, I know, like I want to get to that 185 so that my photo shoot comparisons are like pretty good. But like you've talked about this, like your body, or you feel pretty good around the like low 190s, like esque type thing. And that's like comfortable for your lifestyle, for your training. It doesn't require a lot of management, of time taken away from the family sort of thing. Like, that. If you are listening to this and you don't know those things, I would generally err on the reverse diet side. It allows you to remain leaner, but you're still now doing pretty much the exact same thing that you were dieting from an effort standpoint, but calories are, increasing pretty much week over week, as long as adherence is pretty decent. The last thing I will say there is, personally, this reverse post the bottom of a diet is my absolute favorite time to be of a caloric periodization, because I mean, for me, it's just like everything is firing on all cylinders. Like, you're super, super lean. Your food is increasing week over week. Your energy is increasing week over week. Your sex drive starts like peaking back up again. And then you just continue to look better every single week for like, 8, 9, 10 weeks as food is coming up. Like, to me, that's fun as all hell. But this is also what I do professionally. So I have a much more, kind of strange relationship with food than, majority of people probably do. So.
No, that's super well said on all of the points that you made. And it's good that you cleared that up too, because the way that I handle this is probably not the way I would coach people, at least unless they had similar kind of aspirations and experience as myself. I very much think that most people should take advantage of that reverse period. And then it also especially depends on where they're coming from. Like, for me, 180 is really, really, really lean. Like, it's bordering on, unhealthy lean type levels. But if somebody's coming from 25% body fat and then they're down to 15% body fat, that's way different than going from 16% to 9% or something along those lines. So everything's relative and specific to the individual. Yeah.
What you just said, it 100%, 100%.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I took from what you said too. I just kind of put numbers to it. So man, this episode's going way longer than we expected. But basically, the one other thing I wanted to say here is that we had the episode 2 episodes ago about the psychological versus physiological need to deload. And there's the saying that vision is 2020 in retrospect or something along those lines. I probably butchered that.
Hindsight is 2020.
There you go. Hindsight's 2020. So in my last mesocycle that lasted 7 microcycles, psychologically, I probably felt the need to deload at after week 5. Like I probably should have in retrospect. But the crazy thing is that I didn't, because I knew that I had this photo shoot coming up. I knew that I had this 9-day period where I was going to be taking time off to drive to Wisconsin and settle into this vacation, etc. So I pushed myself through the last 2 weeks and did week 6 and 7. And week 6 and 7, I improved on literally almost every lift. I either improved or stayed the same on everything, despite being in the last 2 weeks of my diet, despite already having reached this point of this desire to deload psychologically. And I just didn't, but I kept progressing, which A, supports my point that it's more psychological than it is physiological. But second, I want to point out something I felt during those last 2 weeks, and I didn't really acutely note it in my brain because I think I was powered by this adrenaline and this like intense focus to get to the photo shoot. But now in retrospect, I remember so many times in the last 2 weeks where I'd be downstairs playing with Bryson. We have a little Nerf basketball hoop in the basement, or we're pitching the ball out front and he's hitting like wiffle balls. And in normal life, I have no problem chasing balls around. Like if that ball is across the room, I'll run and go get it. If the wiffle ball is hitting to the street, I'll go out and go get it. But many times in those last 2 weeks, the ball would be hit or the ball would roll across the room and I would just stare at it and be like, fuck that. Like I do not have the desire to get up and go get that ball right now. And so it could certainly be argued that that might be partially related to the diet and having low energy coming in. But I think that it's also just as much related to the fact that I was pushing so hard in the gym and kind of past this point of fatigue, right? So it just I think the lesson here, if I were to just try to boil it down to something, is that we all can be a little bit more aware of where we may or may not be lacking energy in daily life as a result of the things that we're doing to pursue our fitness. And so, just in these last few days, despite having a fucked up low back and despite having my foot all messed up, I have more general energy to go do stuff. It's just unfortunate that I'm broken and I can't actually go do stuff. But I am going to remember this because I don't want to push my training to a point now where I find myself sitting there and like just lacking desire to go walk 8 feet to go pick a ball up. So I'm going to be more aware of that. And I think that I'm going to tailor my training efforts and volume so that I can potentially avoid being that fatigued in subsequent cycles. So I just thought that may be like a lesson for somebody that may be experiencing something similar as well.
No, I do really, really like that. And I actually was having this conversation with one of my clients today during our check-in. Everyone's life, and this is going to be hugely individually variable, I guess is the terminology I'm looking for, where pushing training further and pushing the diet to get leaner objectively makes your life worse, not better. And it's really hard person to person to kind of pinpoint, like what a really generalized way we could talk about it would be like a body fat percentage. However, that's going to differ based on other factors of your life. Are you married? Do you have children? Like these sorts of things. It is a sliding scale, but everyone is going to have that threshold where getting leaner makes your life actually worse, not better. Past, like I haven't seen figures on this, Bryan, and it's really, really hard to say, but it might be, maybe this is a discussion for another day, but trying to kind of pinpoint at what approximate body fat percentage would getting leaner not benefit your health, right? That would, I think that would be a fantastic conversation. Maybe that's something we bring someone on for. It's something that I think about a lot with, my clients personally. But But yeah, I think especially having a family and being a dad, like that's a situation where it's like a very real thing. You're like, fuck, I'm playing with my son and I don't want to go get the ball to throw it to him again because I'm all dieted out and trained too hard. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I definitely get that. I think it's a really interesting thing
Yeah.
to bring up.
I wonder how much of it is like, if you could assign percentages to like, this much of it is from the diet and this much of it is from you were training too hard type thing, you know? Because there's like a part of me that wonders, like, so if I was doing 2 or 3 sets of most movements by the end of my meso, like, what if I just did one? What if it was like a series of progressive warm-up sets and then I just had like one top set? Because we know that like one set is basically 70 to 80% that you would get from 3 sets. And that's assuming that you're like some 2-year trained person in a study. I'm guessing I can get a lot more from one set than that college student in the study can get from one set. So like, what if I saved myself 1 or 2 sets and just did one? I'm in a diet anyway. It's not like I'm building muscle. Maybe I don't need to be pursuing the amount of volume that I was doing, you know? So that's something that I'm considering too in future diets too, is even taking a lower volume approach than I was. Because as much as I do tend to err on the side of lower volumes, like most of my muscle groups were between 8 and 12 sets per week. And that's still in that like moderate range. So I'm guessing if I were to go to like 5 to 7 sets a week, that saves me a ton of energy and still could potentially retain me the same amount of muscle throughout the course of the diet. So anyway, just thoughts for kind of future experiments.
Yeah, I mean, I think you really did hit the nail on the head there. I mean, I would put my money on that fatigue is more than 50% calorie deficit mediated as opposed to, the training intensity. Because let's say, that same training intensity volume is there, but now calories are 20% higher. I'm sure you extend that runway. And then the thing that I really, really like that you said is specifically like, I'm in a calorie deficit. I know that I'm not going to be building muscle anyway. Like, how much volume is sufficient to maximally retain as much lean body mass as I otherwise normally would as volume increases. But as it does increase, that fatigue increases pretty much exponentially with more performed.
Yep, totally. All right.
Question
well, I think
for
we're
you.
an hour in and we just got through all our updates.
What do you think about we just push this injury conversation to the next episode?
Yeah. Let me see if I had anything else that I moved from updates down to the injury section. Yeah, I think we can mostly do that. One thing I did want to mention is that with my foot the way it was, I've been unable to walk, obviously, because when I do walk, it creates this lopsided body thing. But what I did find is that I can bike. And so that has been what I've been doing. And I think that that's just one thing I'll leave you guys with is when you do have injuries, I think part of our big conversation next week is going to be around how can we train around this injury and still do something productive? So in lieu of being able to get the steps that I generally want to maintain, call it mental clarity, cognitive function, and just general health, biking is a great substitute. And so for me, that's been a lifesaver because it allows me to still get out, to throw my headphones on, to feel the breeze, to get some endorphins going and do it in a manner that doesn't cause me further detriment. So that was one thing I originally had in my updates, and then I moved it down to our injury discussion because it was sort of relevant to that. But I think the rest of the stuff can pretty much be saved for next week.
Cool. So yeah, unwound a little bit differently than we had expected, but a great conversation as always, Bryan. And then next week we will cover setbacks, injuries, and how to make the most of that time that you will need to pass by regardless.
Yeah, and hopefully I'll have a bit more of a thorough, optimistic perspective than I may today.
I'm sure time has a nice way of doing that. As always, guys, thank you for listening. Bryan and I will talk to you next week.